So the pandemic's getting worse. It's going to last longer than people think. The economy may or may not still be in a recession, but we are in a depression that's going to last for years. And the psychological behavioral effects will be intergenerational. So this is not like 2008. It's not like the dot-com crash. It's not like 1998 with Russia and LTCM. You have to go back at least as far as the Great Depression in the 1930s, and maybe back to the 1870s to find something comparable. We may be out of the recession already. The third quarter may show positive growth, but that's kind of irrelevant because we're in a depression. A depression is much more profound, much more long-lasting, much more damage than a technical recession. For example, people talk about the V-shaped recovery. The economy went down, and then it comes right back up again. Well, it kind of went down, and it came up a little bit, but it's still way below. So way below what it was. So you say, well, we had 10% growth. I was like, yeah, but you had a 40% drop and 10% growth. Okay, there's your bounce. But where do we go from here? And the answer is probably sideways, or maybe down again. Maybe it's even like what they call a W. The point being, we're not going to get to 2019 levels of output until 2023 at the earliest. We're not going to get to 2019 levels of unemployment, get to those lows until probably 2025. This is a multi-year depression. It will have intergenerational effects. There's one study, very well done. There's actually a group of two economists, one from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, another one an academic, that looked at every pandemic since the Black Death, 1350, that caused 100,000 or more fatalities. And their answer is there were 15, counting the current one. In looking at the economic recovery from those 15 pandemics of that magnitude, it takes 30 years, not 30 months. Wow. To normalize interest rates. And again, this isn't speculation or inference. They had very hard data. You can say this time it's different, but I don't see why. So my point is, I grew up in the 1950s and in the 60s when I was a kid, and I did not live through the Great Depression, but my parents did and my grandparents did. And we were raised with a depression mentality, even though, times were good in the 50s, the economy was doing very well. But we were taught you go around the neighborhood with your wagon and collect tin cans from the neighbors for recycling. We weren't doing it for environmental reasons. We were doing it because there was steel and you could build tanks and planes with it. So in other words, even in prosperous times, 20 years after the Depression, we still had the Depression mindset. And it didn't really change until the late 60s when the baby boomers came of age. And then it was, rock and roll and prosperity and all that. But so this is going to take 5 years to come out of statistically, but it's going to take 30 years to come out of psychologically. So that's where we are. And as with the Great Depression, you didn't end up in the Roaring 20s. You ended up in World War II. And so you end up in a different world. People sense that. They may not be economic historians, or they may not be behavioral psychologists, but they sense it. And they know that this is not, by the way, so far, this has not been a financial panic. It's an economic crisis, yes. But the banks haven't failed. It's just that every single small business in America has failed. That's a very different thing. We're looking at 50 million Americans who have applied for unemployment benefits. They say with a few adjustments, not very much of a stretch, the unemployment rate is on its way to 20%, worst level since the Great Depression. So and the pandemic, this is not influenza. You can learn a lot by studying influenza pandemics or other cholera or other pandemics. Now, if you have it and you're compromised, your immune system is compromised, you might get viral pneumonia or bacterial pneumonia. You might get the flu because you're vulnerable, but it's not. The disease is not the flu. This is the 6th coronavirus that's transferred to humans. There are thousands of them out there in bats and other animals, but this is the 6th one that has caused a pandemic in humans. Of the first 5, there are no vaccines. We have been unsuccessful at getting a vaccine. HIV/AIDS, there's no vaccine. There's a treatment. People don't necessarily understand the difference between vaccine and treatment. Vaccine prevents the disease. A treatment deals with the disease if you haven't happened to get it, but it's not a cure. So we can manage HIV/AIDS, and there are some treatments for coronavirus, but there are no vaccines for any coronaviruses. So hopefully we get one. That would be very good news, but you have to be a little skeptical of that. So putting it all together, we have a pandemic that's going to last much longer than people expect, may actually get a lot worse. You look at numbers from Brazil, India, Russia, Iran, and elsewhere, Mexico, Peru. They're very good. There's very good data on this. Obviously, this pandemic emerged. The earliest cases. There's some debate. November, December, 2019 in Wuhan, China. It then spread in both directions. Came east and hit the west coast of the United States, so Seattle and Los Angeles. But it also went west and landed in Italy, Europe in general, but in particular Italy, and there was a reason for that. It was Fashion Week in Milan. The Chinese own a large portion of the Italian luxury goods and fashion market, so they were there in force. But what was going on is that the Chinese did not lock down their population. They did not lock down the city of Wuhan until late January. So throughout December and early January, there were hundreds of thousands of Chinese flying all over the world. And then it got to Italy. Now, what happened in Italy, and this is not unusual with a virus, it mutated. And so then that strain, called the Italian strain, came to New York. What happened was the strain that hit New York was much more contagious, not necessarily more lethal, but more contagious. But if it's more contagious, you're going to have more fatalities. And so New York was battling a slightly different, same virus, I guess, but a different genome, a different arrangement of the amino acids and the genes. So, but now what has happened is that the Italian strain, which landed in New York, has now spread to the rest of the United States. So all of a sudden, California is catching up. California is going to soon have 8,000 fatalities. And so all this, hey, California did everything right. It was like, no, you got the mild strain from Wuhan, but when it went to Italy and came to New York, now it's in California, Texas, Florida, and we're seeing the fatality rate go up, which brings us back kind of to your question, Shay, which is this virus, this pandemic is not going away soon. And the way to understand the economy is it's a technical recession. So first quarter at negative GDP, second quarter, it's not announced yet, but it will clearly have, deeply negative GDP. You get 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, that's a recession.